It begins on a cold night in the Chinese countryside, under a sky bright with floodlights and hope.
In the cold night air.
Families gather on rooftops and balconies to watch a rocket rise over the nearby launch site, a pillar of fire carrying the promise of a richer, more powerful nation. Seconds later, that promise tips off its axis, the flame bends sideways, and the tower of metal drives straight toward the town that is supposed to be celebrating.
High above the valley,
the explosion does not care which side of history anyone is on.
Column bending slightly.
A long march rocket slams into homes, workshops, and dormitories, turning concrete and brick into dust. Official reports will later suggest only a handful of deaths, but footage of flattened buildings tells a darker story. We still do not know the real number, but we know this. When China launches rockets from inland valleys, failure does not vanish into the ocean, it lands on people. That night in the 1990s is not an isolated story. It is the sharpest illustration of a design choice made decades earlier. In the early years of the Cold War, Chinese leaders assumed that their launch pads would double as missile bases.
The government has released its
Survival, not safety, was the priority. They buried these sites deep in the country's interior, cloaked by mountains and distance from foreign bombers. The physics of orbit, however, never got that memo. Rockets flying east from an inland pad must cross over land on the way to space. In every stage they discard traces a band of risk across villages and farms below. China eventually joined that club with the Wenchang Launch Center on Hainan Island, facing a wide stretch of the Pacific. Yet the older inland pads did not vanish. They remained busy, especially Xichang in the lush southwest, ringed by hills and river valleys that also support millions of ordinary lives. A trajectory map for a typical mission shows a launch from Xichang, an eastward climb, and a staging zone smeared over the neighboring province like a faint scar. On paper, it is a probability footprint. On the ground, it is fire in the sky. The choice of fuel made that fire even more ominous. Many Long March 2, 3, and 4 rockets burn a hypergolic mix, hydrazine-based fuel and nitrogen tetroxide oxidizer. These chemicals ignite the moment they touch, no spark required, which makes them wonderfully convenient for military missiles and finicky deep space engines. They are also acutely toxic. Short exposure at high concentrations can scar lungs, inflame eyes, and damage organs. The orange-brown clouds trailing some Chinese launches are not romantic exhaust plumes. They are chemistry experiments no one volunteered for. Other spacefaring nations use hypergolics too, but mostly for small thrusters and upper stages that operate in near vacuum. The big booster engines are usually fed with liquid oxygen and kerosene or methane, combinations that are dangerous up close but disperse into relatively harmless compounds downrange. China itself proved it could build this cleaner architecture with the Long March 5, whose core stage looks much more like a modern heavy launcher. Yet decade after decade, hypergolic stacks continued to rise from inland sites, and their spent stages kept falling over rural China in streaks of toxic smoke. Imagine living in a mountain village where the calendar is marked not just by harvests and festivals, but by launch schedules. An announcement crackles over a loudspeaker telling residents to stay indoors at a certain hour, to avoid touching any strange debris, to keep children away from the river if they see bright-colored residue floating downstream. Most days, nothing happens. Then one afternoon, a thunderclap echoes from beyond the ridge, and a farmer looks up to see a tumbling cylinder trailing orange fumes, scouring a line through the forest before plowing into a hillside. Inside the control rooms, the story looks different. A young engineer stares at dispersion plots showing where first stages might fall. She notices how many simulated impact points overlap tiny clusters of houses and terraces. She considers raising her hand and asking whether the launch rate justifies the risk. Then she remembers who designed the procedures, who signs the reliability reports, and how often colleagues who question assumptions are quietly moved aside. Her silence is not stupidity. It is survival inside a tightly controlled system that prizes visible success over uncomfortable questions.
With the clock ticking,
the technical evolution of China's rockets only sharpened that tension. By the 2000s and 2010s, the country had gone from launching test payloads to flying crews into orbit, docking with experimental space labs, and then assembling the Tiangong space station. Each step required more mass in low Earth orbit, and more mass usually means bigger stages or more aggressive staging. To loft Tiangong's largest modules, Chinese engineers designed the Long March 5B, a variant with a single enormous core and side boosters. Here the trade-off became global. Instead of discarding its main stage early and letting it drop into the ocean, the Long March 5B keeps the core burning almost all the way to orbital velocity. The result is efficient. One massive push places the space station module and the heavy core into similar low orbits. It is also unprecedented in modern launch practice. Most other large rockets ensure that any stage reaching orbit is either small enough to burn up completely or equipped to re-enter over a controlled corridor. The 5B leaves a roughly 20-ton, 30-plus meter hulk, tumbling in an orbit that will inevitably decay without precise control. Uncontrolled re-entry turns the planet beneath into a moving target. Atmospheric drag slowly drains energy from the abandoned core. Each orbit shaving height, each pass through denser layers adding unpredictability. Tracking networks can estimate when the booster will finally fall, but the uncertainty window remains wide until the last few hours. Maps on news sites fill with swaths of possible ground tracks, sweeping over oceans, continents, and cities. Each time this happens, people in dozens of countries briefly share the same odd thought. Some anonymous piece of China's space hardware might land near me. In a small apartment far from any launch site, a university student doom scrolls through social media as one of these re-entries approaches. Her feed serves up alarmist posts predicting catastrophic impacts, dismissive hot takes insisting that the risk is effectively zero, and grainy videos from past events showing glowing fragments streaking over beaches. After half an hour, her chest feels tight, not because she faces any real danger, but because the constant churn of half-information and outrage has burned away her sense of proportion. She closes the app finally and realizes that for all the noise she has learned almost nothing concrete. At the same time, analysts at space agencies in Europe, North America, and elsewhere run their own models, posting updates that quietly contrast with the bluster. They acknowledge the risk is small any given event, yet point out that repeating it over and over is unnecessary. They note that several uncontrolled 5B re-entries have already scattered debris across the Indian Ocean and parts of Africa, narrowly missing populated areas. They remind anyone listening that the technology to deorbit large stages more safely is well understood. Reserve a little propellant, fire engines at the right moment, and send the hardware into a remote patch of ocean. None of this is beyond China's capability. The same nation has landed a rover on the far side of the moon, an extraordinarily complex feat of navigation and communication. It has operated a robotic explorer on Mars, guided relay satellites through cislunar space, and run a busy crewed station with regular rotations. The problem is not competence, it is incentives. When prestige missions go well, headlines and domestic pride follow. When debris lands in a sparsely populated region or splashes into the sea, the cost is diffuse, hard to count, and easy to downplay or dismiss. The pattern reaches beyond one country.
Welcome to the
Every spacefaring power has, at some point, pushed risk onto people who never got to vote on the mission. What makes the current moment feel different is the density of valuable hardware in orbit and the amount of life beneath it. Low Earth orbit is now crowded with weather satellites, navigation systems, spy platforms, and commercial constellations linking millions of users on the ground. Each uncontrolled object that re-enters passes near those assets on the way down, adding a tiny extra layer of hazard to an environment already noisy with fragments. Down on Earth, the moral geometry remains stark. In a government office, a mission manager scrolls through emails from an international partner pushing for higher launch cadence and looser safety constraints. Every message is framed in the language of opportunity, market share, national image, innovation. None mentions the fishermen who might pull scorched metal from their nets, or the villagers who might wake to a toxic cloud rolling down a ravine. One evening he types a short reply.
Celebrate historic breakthroughs in
Future
space
launches
station
will include
expansions.
controlled
Smaller
deorbit plans
local
as standard,
footprints
no
quietly
exceptions.
report on. The
The
narrative
partner
diverges
complains,
sharply
but the policy
amidst the
holds.
celebration of national pride.
A small
There's
boundary
growing
drawn
fear and
late still
frustration.
changes something. International norms are beginning to catch up, slowly and unevenly. United Nations committees have issued guidelines urging states to minimize debris, share information on reentries, and take responsibility when their hardware causes damage. Insurance markets quietly reflect that advice. Premiums and contracts increasingly assume that large stages will not be left to fall where they may. Private operators whose business models depend on a stable, predictable orbital environment sit on panels and working groups, nudging standards toward more conservative practices. None of that is as dramatic as a launch broadcast, and none of it erases the risks already taken. But it points toward a simple truth that often gets lost in conversations about ambition. Engineering does not end at the edge of the atmosphere. Choosing where to put launch pads, which fuels to burn, and how to retire dead hardware are as much a part of spaceflight as designing engines or guidance computers. They determine who breathes the exhaust, who lives under the staging footprint, and who lies awake wondering what might fall from the sky. Space will never be gentle. To reach orbit, a vehicle must hit speeds over 7 kilometers per second and survive violent changes in pressure and temperature. There will always be failure modes, freak weather, and unpredictable interactions at the edge of the atmosphere. The question facing every space program, Chinese or otherwise, is not whether they can avoid all risk but where they choose to park it, how honestly they describe it, and how much say the most exposed people have in the decision. The Chinese space program shows what incredible focus and resources can achieve in a remarkably short time.
In low Earth orbit, the threat of
Lunar far-side exploration, Martian landings, and an independent station all assembled within 2 decades.
The dusty plains of Mars.
It also shows what happens when the drive to catch up and then pull ahead is not matched by an equally public commitment to downrange safety.
The hidden footprints
Rockets that work as intended still shower villagers with fuel-soaked debris. Stages that complete their job in orbit still return to Earth in chaotic, poorly predicted arcs. The danger here is not mystical or unique. It is simply a willingness to accept that other people, often far from the centers of power, will carry the hidden part of the cost. If there is a lesson to draw, it is not that one nation is uniquely reckless and others are pure. It is that whenever prestige, secrecy, and speed combine, the temptation to shift risk outward grows. Citizens, engineers, and policymakers who care about the future of spaceflight have to keep asking the unglamorous questions. Where will this stage come down?
But the heavens.
What is in that exhaust plume? Who lives under this ground track? And have they even been told? Space in the end is not an abstract frontier. It is a set of decisions that begin on the ground, leave scars in the sky, and then return home, one way or another. Consequences linger.
Beyond the clustered village rooftops.